These weekly meetings are primarily for the benefit of the people here personally to whom I am addressing, but I am taking this opportunity to mention again that I'm aware there is now a continuing process of people in other cities seeing this on TV for the first time. Some of you are seeing this in a group situation in other cities of people who have already been watching this. And in some of these group situations, some of you are walking in off the street and seeing this for the first time. I am now beginning to get some correspondence from people who have seen me on TV in other cities on the infamous cable stations, or some of you who saw these tapes in the group situation. Another small comment to you from some of the correspondence I am getting. If you feel as though this is of interest to you and it feels good, then you should be delighted. But you are wasting your time and you're distracting yourself to immediately begin to correspond with me on the basis of trying to help me out. Of sending me communiques about how impressed you were with it, except for these certain reservations, except for these certain areas that I obviously do not understand. This is not unusual at all, and it's no weakness on your part. The primary problem, from what you're seeing now, the way it is affecting many of you, is that you're not accustomed to the way in which I am presenting this. Because what you have either been accustomed to or you expected to become accustomed to was that which was more straightforward and dogmatic, and which would be primarily based on some kind of faith. That is, some minister, rabbi, guru, mystic, New Age teacher laying down the law from some ancient source or his apparent interpretation of ancient sources. But the basis of it is some sort of faith that I or those people would be stating the rules, stating the great cosmic laws, and etc. There is a place for that. There is nothing wrong with that. But if any of you find yourself attracted to this, don't be too hasty in thinking that I may not know exactly what I'm doing from the way in which I'm presenting it. Because when it's based primarily on a kind of faith of you hearing dogmatic statements and the great rules of the universe and how a person should be doing this or that to reach some great moment of epiphany and some continual state of enlightenment, what you're missing here is that kind of faith which is rather passive. And the way in which I have for the last several years been presenting this, it requires your participation. Hence, the sorts of things that seem to be rhetorical questions and some of my minor theatrics, scratching my chin and saying, what if, and how about this, and some of the jokes. This is not a nightclub routine, and I am not, although it's all ad lib, I am not standing here stumbling and wondering what's going to happen next. Feel free to continue writing me, but you could possibly choke yourself to death immediately to get entangled with any kind of passing voices in you that finds favor with some of what I say and then wonder about other things I say that perhaps I didn't know exactly where to go next, and so I made a joke. I asked a rhetorical question. Tut tut. It's a small warning. You'll have to figure out the rest of it yourself. And now, on with the show. Not really far removed from that is something I would point out very specifically in words. Is that people involved with this should chew everything that they ingest on the basis of ideas, which is a form of food. It is specific energy. Is they should chew everything that you intake most carefully and thoroughly, and you must be able to do it with 3 sets of teeth. When it's in the realm of more physical food, we're back to the great binary world of everything that you put in your mouth that really catches your attention. You either like it or you don't like it. It's either tasty to you or it's not tasty. If it is tasteless, if it is bland, you forget about it, which is another story. The only thing of interest in food is that which is either tasteful and pleasing or that which is not tasty. That kind of digestion, that kind of chewing of physical food, you should realize, is most mechanical. It is automatic in everyone. It is automatic in all creatures that ingest food. When you're talking about the realm of ideas, when you're talking about the ingestion of idea energy, you cannot operate on the basis of either chewing it this way or that way. That is not a thorough chewing, and it will not lead to any profitable digestion and use of any idea, of anything that you hear from anyone or anything that you believe that you have observed about life. If it's only on the basis, same kind of basis as I pointed out about food, nothing happens. It will keep you alive in the same way that a constant diet, if you're the right kind of person, of Campbell's cream with celery soup, as bland as it is, if you're the right kind of people, it'll keep you alive. That and a little Diet Coke and you're in business. You can't really make any comment. You can't begin to work out in a gym and put on any muscular structure on the basis of that kind of physical food. Likewise, you cannot, from your observation, from your reading, from your so-called thought processes, you cannot build any new material, any new muscle. You cannot expand your understanding if you only operate on the basis of chewing your food with two sets of teeth. If you're only operating on the basis that I like what I hear, what I just read I approve of, whereas on the other hand, something I read yesterday is obviously a sack full of falderoy. You cannot grow from that, literally. People do not ingest. They do not chew what they take in. And all you've got to do is notice this. It's quite evident once you take note of it, that whatever flows in, whether it be light waves altering the molecular structure of your brain through the physical eyes, whether it be sounds that you hear coming from a lecturer, from someone making comments to you, that goes through here and creates a different kind of molecular activity in your brain. If you only operate on the basis immediately, which everyone does, that is the arrangement of humanity, that I agree with that. I like that. I never thought about it that way. I hope that's true. That sounds right. With all the negative aspects, reflections of what I've just said. If that's all you do, it will keep you alive. The same way that cream of celery soup will keep you alive. But you will not grow. And you've had a lifetime on which to reflect upon what I've just said. That it is not simply a matter of intaking and expanding knowledge. It's your ability to use it. Last week I mentioned that it's not the expansion of knowledge itself, it would be the expansion of the knowledge receptors. It is not the kind of food that you take in as ideas, it's what you do with it. It was useful at one time, but it was a very neat trick, quite efficient for the apparent prophets and bellwethers, men of a different time zone throughout history, to speak to large numbers of people, to attempt to get the message to large numbers of people on the basis of what I am telling you. The words themselves are of supreme supernatural importance. Not only you, all of humanity, if it were deemed proper, have had the history of humanity to realize that that does not happen. It seems to happen with a few people. But once there seems to be someone who has an unusual, an extraordinarily cogent message that even seems to be anachronistic, they seem to be in another time zone, that the words, the ideas from these great religious people seem to have some kind of impact on a small number of people. But when you get into the masses, those, for instance, go back and use Christianity and Jesus. The people say the words have great effect. People pay great lip service. They spend a lot of money with it. But those of you who grew up in any religion, Christianity or Judaism or whatever, you had enough opportunity to realize that it does not specifically, in any day-by-day sense, have an effect on people. Now, it has an effect on a large general scheme of humanity. All these world's religions have altered the molecular structure of large numbers of people, but not on an individual basis. It's a very small number. So what is right before humanity's eyes, and they still cannot see it, is that the words themselves do not have a wide range molecular effect. It has a schematic effect on a large number of people, millions of people. If I was going to be more every day, I would use the word cultural, but too many of you people take it in the wrong sense. That is, you take it in the ordinary sense. But millions of people get affected by such things as an apparent religious message, the words themselves. Even nations get formed around some religion. But individually, it has no specific effect, other than apparently on a small number of people who were around when the religion got concocted, when the first maps were drawn. I'm going to try and pull your attention in 2 or 3 directions along this particular quadrant of my strange, folded and torn picnic map. When it comes back to the idea of whether humanity has, in fact, any freedom, or whether those who understand it have to tell little white and little polka-dotted lies and make it appear that, sure, change is possible. For one thing, ordinary senses tell everyone that change is possible. And to try and concoct a map or some sort of mystical system on the basis that no one can do anything, the only thing you will attract would be people that you would not want to associate with. But back to the sensation of the senses, of line-level consciousness that says change is possible. And you don't have to just look externally. In the partnership that is everyone ordinarily, there is this continuing sensation, varying slightly from person to person, that I should change. I didn't read this. No one told me this. But it's been preying upon my little mind for many months, if not years, that I should make a change. That within itself would apparently be proof that humanity has some freedom. That the person, the example I just made up, whatever it is, that they should lose weight, control their temper, be more religious, stop drinking. Apparently some set of dynamics had already been put into motion that people nowadays normally infer was caused by my childhood. That is, the environment. It's made me be an overeater, underachiever, overdrinker. It made me as ugly as a barrel full of armpits. But I've got this old me, I've got this me that is somewhere within the city limits of being disreputable. But it shows that there is something possible, that there is some amount of freedom, regardless of any kind of philosophical theories and debate, because I personally feel the need to change. We're now at the state capital of Binaryville, because consciousness cannot then, I'll say it real fast again and try to make it as slick as prune juice, is the question of where did I, that is the person I'm making up, where did I get the motivation to change? The reason I went back into this general territory is to point out something a little more specifically than I have done in words, at least in this particular part of the town, that at the ordinary level of consciousness, at which everyone is born and which almost everyone is doomed to operate, they must operate in a binary fashion or they could not be conscious. And binary fashion, of course, also implies, dictates, that there be a continuing running of sentences with periods. You have to be able to isolate this whole continuum of reality to say anything. To be conscious, you have to start off with a capital letter, begin a new sentence saying, I've got to quit eating when I'm not hungry. I've got to cut down on my food intake. Period. I'm overweight. I'm not only less attractive than I possibly could be, but it's probably bad for my health. Period. I've been this way ever since a child. I led a sheltered life. My mother overate. She made me very nervous, comma. But it's still, I guess, my responsibility. I'm now grown. I can't blame it on her forever. Period. And I know I can change because I realize the need to change. Period. That is being ordinarily conscious. Without that, no one would be conscious. If you were not binary, if everyone did not start off in a binary fashion, you would be confronted with what appears to be at this level a closed loop, a closed system, that there is nowhere to find a starting place, to say, I have got to change, I want to change, and then be confronted with the question, all right, there's this about me I want to change, and then there's this voice in me, these other sensations, this neural activity that ordinary people call their personality, their soul. It's just more neural activity, the same kind of molecular activity that makes people overeat. But it appears to be different. And it appears to give the sensation of freedom through the ability to isolate the continuum of reality and to chop it up into sentences with periods, because they're left with, all right, there is some freedom, because all of me is not a drunk. All of me is not a pig-out artist. All of me does not suffer. A piece of me tells me not to overeat, not to overdrink, not to oversuffer. That piece of me is proof that I'm free. Were it not for consciousness being based upon an ordinary binary basis, not that far removed from the life of worms and sparrows and frogs, except with this yellow circuit going that can talk. But were it not for that, humanity, if they could still be conscious, would be faced with the question of, all right, where cometh the motivation for these voices, these sensations in me that say, hey, the other part of you should change? It would be absolutely, of course I'm playing with reality again, because it can't happen, but what appears to be one's consciousness would be absolutely overwhelmed. It would be drowned. You would have a cosmic blowout. You would have a mental hernia. you would simply fall on the floor in a heap. Again, I point out, even when I say it in words, and enough of you I know now, catch it when I say things like that. Notice again, off on your own, under ordinary conditions, you cannot walk around, and remember this. Once you get involved with such as this, or things you may have been involved with before this, it is still the sensation, the unexamined sensation, that all right, now I'm on to a certain amount of freedom because there's that piece of me that wants to come here and hear these commentaries, that wants to do the things that you give as tasks to try and pursue the suggestions you make. There's that piece of me. It is in some way is freed from my baser life, from our more mundane existence. Oh yeah. Oh yeah? All right, from whence cometh this other inspiration? Your forefathers would have said, all right, that's the godly part. The evil part is the part of me that wants to live on Twinkies and vodka. It's the godly part of me, it's the voice of God, the spark of the gods in me that tells me, no, 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 no. But you people have to be bigger boys and girls than that. It is a question of from whence cometh the molecular, the biochemical activity in me that says, I eat too much. Where does it come from? From what neighborhood could it possibly arise that's in a different part of the universe than that part of me that wants to overeat? And the voices inside, those of you of a hipper sort, say, hey man, give me a break. I can't deal with that. And that's a fact. Jack. It cannot deal with it. It has to be a binary basis to be conscious to start with. You have got to be genetically wired up to believe in good and evil, right and wrong, and to believe in personal freedom, that there is something in me that motivates some part of me in conflict with other parts of life. You can't find it. Although it wouldn't do any good to go off on an expedition looking for it, because you can't even remember the question. But there is nowhere to look. But what I was specifically trying to draw your attention to tonight is, again, that there is nothing wrong with things as they are. All of life is just right. Ordinary life is perfect if you're ordinary. If you're ordinary, you don't belong in this, not by any means. But everything else is just right. The belief in good and evil, of demons and spirits, the belief in the conscious and the unconscious mind, the belief that people can be more humane and less humane. Those are not fallacious beliefs. They're not childish fairy tales from which humanity has yet to grow out of. That is consciousness. You could not be conscious. You would have never been conscious in the ordinary sense of the word, in the minimal sense of the word, were you not wired up. Not through any environment, not through your parents, not through your religion, but wired up, that the biochemical activity in you that produces the sensation of individual consciousness is synonymous with two sets of teeth, two eyes, the same binary basis as the computer. Nobody seems to notice that humanity now considers the computer to be the work of art and science and technology of all of time. But then further on down in the article, they point out, well, now, don't get overheated on the beauty of computers, because after all, they can only count to two. Give me a break. The people that invented it, they can only count to two. What else is new? If they did count to three, the computer could count to three. They do, this is just an aside, but you might see something in it. They both exaggerate and do themselves a disservice to say, well, after all, a computer can only count to two. After all, it's not, like me and you, it's not a human. And then further on down the article, the same person begins to speculate, perhaps sometimes even fearfully, about, sometimes I wonder about these machines we made. I wonder if they're actually looking at me and if they're approaching anything resembling intelligence. If they can count to 2, they're intelligent. The man who invented it, the man who designed it, the man who is now rich and famous from it, he could only count to 2. The work of art, the work of technology, should be obvious to some of you, as obvious as this. But the work of art, the end result cannot surpass the person who produced it. Perhaps I'll give some solace to any of you who do worry about machines are going to take over. If you know anybody, if you've ever met another human that you're afraid they're so intelligent they're going to take over, if you believe that, then you can fear about machines. But you don't really belong here. There are better things to fear than that. You know, such as how long can James Brown keep it up? The whole beautiful concept of consciousness, which I have never really defined for anyone, because I've given you enough to do, that you should have taken upon yourself along the many tasks I have given, to realize that what seems to be consciousness cannot define itself. It cannot report to you any description of what it is, which to a few people is an astounding lesson in itself when it's seen. That all these ideas that a man should know himself. I'll take tests, I'll take personality tests, I'll take job placement tests, I'll go to an astrologer, I'll talk to my minister, for someone to help tell me what I am. And nobody finds that strange. They're not supposed to, but nobody finds that curious. That I need somebody to tell me what I am. I've had 40 years living with this thing, and I'm going up to somebody. Going to spend 15 minutes if they're an astrologer, perhaps 15 months if they're a psychiatrist. I'm going to say, doctor, can you tell me what's wrong with me? Or I'll take this test. It was written by 3 people with PhDs from Stanford and Northwestern. And this test, they'll put into a machine nowadays, and this machine will come back and tell me what sort of person I am, and it'll be well worth the money. $85 is nothing. A 3-hour test, it has to go off to Princeton. It takes 2 weeks at least, and it comes back in a sealed envelope. And it tells me what I am. Nobody finds that curious. Again, for you newer people, this is not an attack on the world of academia or tests or psychology or any part of life. That's the way things are supposed to be. But for the few people that need to furnish the cobblestones for pushing the road outside the city limits of Ordinaryville in our present time zone, you should find that curious. How come I've been living here 20 to 40 years, and I'm willing to pay somebody money? I'm willing to spend time for somebody very sincerely, and for me to sit down with them and say, tell me about me. I was born such and such a date. Or here, let me drink the tea out of my cup and look at the leaves. Look at my hand. Feel my head. Or just talk to me. And I'm going to tell you everything about me. I'm going to let it all hang out, and then you tell me what I am. Consciousness. The whole thing, I'm not going to give you a great specific definition even tonight, but just consciousness, I'm not meaning in the ordinary sense that many of you would-be mystics would take it. Consciousness seems to be what a human is. It seems to be what you are, to be Fred or Mary. It seems to be what's going on up here in you. It seems to be the mortal human source of your thoughts, your feelings, your sensations, your imagination. But consciousness, without giving any real biological definition of it or otherwise, if you look at it in a certain way, consciousness is like a knot tied in a rope. That apparently it's a something. There's even a name for it. There's a noun for it. And you can apparently loosen it and move it about the rope, put it in the middle, pull it down at this end. And yet, there is no such thing as a knot. There is a routing of the rope. And then it's called a knot. Consciousness at its ordinary level. I submit to you. You new people like to hear me submit things. How about I ask of you? I ask of you, is that not totally unlike consciousness if you attempt to look at it? It can apparently move about, and everyone swears there is such a thing because everyone would swear there is such a thing as a knot. I know not when I see one, I can tie a knot. The whole world agrees that's a knot. And yet there is no such thing as a knot. It's a taking of the rope, and it's routing it into a certain configuration, and then they call it a knot. And as long as you're working at the binary level, everything eventually is going to become a noun, a thing. I submit to you, is it not more like a process? It apparently moves, it can apparently be seen, but you cannot have a knot without a rope. You can have a rope without a knot, and you can take the knot and you can loosen it to such a degree that you can't even see it's a knot anymore. It's just a rope. It's a process that's been looped, sort of in a certain position. If you had a rope long enough, you could loosen a knot and still have a knot, and loosen it enough, the ordinary consciousness could not see that there was a knot there. I would ask you even further, for your rhetorical question lovers and fearers, could this be another form of the great regal collusion? Within the several and many tasks I have given about attempting to see this partnership, attempting to see this binary condition up here, attempting to see the very thing that everyone calls their consciousness, and then what to make of it, what to make of the lack of success in attempting some of the tasks, or what to make of the sensations the perceptions you did have of trying to observe and to study this phenomenon. I have a question for you. Why has no one, not even no one, why has not all of humanity, the sciences, ordinary intelligent people, why has humanity not found it to be very curious, worthy of great investigation, as to the basis of man's continuing verbal response to any and all questions? That somebody asks another person a question, and the person has an answer. Where did that answer come from? What if it's a question that would apparently, on the surface, literally, be outside your field of experience? That someone wants to ask you a question about microbiology, and they ask it, but as soon as it gets through, you'd be ready to answer before they got through with the question. But as soon as the question gets through, you have a response. But that's very interesting. I've read some about such and that, but I don't, that's not my field, and I don't know. Don't get hung up in my example, or any example. But consciousness, that is all of humanity at the ordinary level, has never found it to be of interest how each and every person, no matter their degree of education, no matter if they're even literate, that each and every person immediately has a verbal response to any question. And forget whether it's by some ordinary definition, whether it's really responsive, whether it's pertinent. They have a response. You have a response to anything anybody asks you. I ask you further. Well, let me point out, not enough of you are going to hear all that. I strongly urge you to take that part and pursue it on your own, because I'm not going to run it in the ground with words myself, but simply, why is it that humanity, does, and that includes you, of course, does not find it curious as to where / what / anything else is the response in me and everyone else that continually, to the day you die, as soon as you learn to talk, has a verbal response to any question. And as far as you know, somebody walks up on the street and you got no idea what the question's going to be. Somebody walks up and says, could I ask you something? Sure. And you have no doubt. You never think about it, but there's no doubt, no matter what they ask you, whether it's a stranger asking directions, where they have a clipboard and there's a TV camera and a sound man, they say, could we ask you a question? You say, oh, okay. You never analyze it, but there's no chance that they're going to get through and you're going to go, a response will be forthcoming. And for you newer people just hearing this, there is a continuing question I presented to everyone that I'm waiting to get some answers for, and so that I can take off and go back home, is what are you going to say next? Nobody can deal with that. But that is a part of this for you people who have not heard that. That if you could ever not only answer that question, if you understood the question, you would never again be what you are. Is what are you going to say next? But I'm expanding on that, that there is a continuing verbal response to any question. Now, the second rhetorical part I started to ask you several minutes ago was, is it possible that in some way everyone already knows what the question's going to be? This is not science fiction. This is not pseudo-mystical flim-flam. Is it possible that everybody knows what every question's going to be before it's asked them? Don't just laugh. Don't just giggle. Don't just assume I'm fixing to go somewhere else with it. Is it possible? If so, for the third time, or the second time tonight, I could ask you about the possible further occult activities of the regal collusion. I strongly suggest that you consider the possibility, if you get some grasp upon what I originally asked, that is, from whence, how come, how is it that everyone continually, minute by minute, the rest of your life, continually verbally responds in some manner, not just, not just, I don't know. They verbally respond in a manner that is socially, if not intellectually, acceptable to all inquiries. Can I ask you a question? Sure. And here it comes, you got no idea, it would appear, what the person's going to ask. Yeah. That's the first part. The second part, I'm suggesting that you strongly consider the possibility that everybody already knows what every question's going to be. If you get that far, then you have to consider, or you should be considering, what I've been dropping about here and there for the last several weeks. It's not the limitations of individual consciousness taking everything personally, to what you know personally, that what you feel personally, that you are a part of a greater molecular activity that when the parade goes by and they play the national anthem of your country, and you were a draft dodger when you were in college, and suddenly there you stand and a tear trickles down your face, you're not the only one standing there on that street corner crying. Large numbers of people are getting choked up. And there seems to be some insanity, as it's ordinarily called, sweeping some country that begins to engage in terroristic activities or begins to attack their neighbor for some imagined religious or racial or nationalistic cause that other people say is insanity, that it's that leader. It's not that leader. There is a large molecular activity in the body of life taking place. I'm not going to present you rhetorical questions, that sort of thing. You've got to be able to, once I tell you, don't take it on faith, but you've got to be able, if you belong in this, to be able to begin to sense the reality of that. That what I've been telling you from the onset is a fact, that you're living in a body that is alive. But just limiting it for the time being to your known universe, this thing is alive in each and every corner of it. And what is taking place, that the few can eventually realize, is not a personal life of sensation, of thought. It's to understand that you are part of a greater molecular activity. That when a tear reaches your eye, when you feel choked up, when you feel angry, it is not simply you feeling angry, it is a larger scale of molecular activity that is translated verbally in man's mouth and mind as anger, patriotism, fear, hostility. But that activity is taking place on a large scale, whether you realize it or not. It is the height for the few people that belong here, not of egoism, but of dumbness, to blindly, continually to take my feelings, my opinions about what's going on in the Middle East or in Ireland, my feelings about my girlfriend just left me, it just reminds me that most women are just bitches anyway. It is not that happening to you. That is the height of ordinariness. That is eating everything in a binary fashion, and you will never escape from it unless you're ordinary. Then you might get the faith. Then you might feel better, which I'm all in favor of everybody feeling better. But if you're ordinary, you won't feel better hanging around this. If you begin to get a sensation of that, then the kinds of questions I periodically ask, such as, is it possible that everyone knows every question before it's asked, is no longer insanity. It's far from being insanity. As irrational, as impossible as that all appears to the ear of the ordinary, that how is it that I could know what somebody's going to ask before they ask it? Much less how could everybody know every question that's going to be asked before they ask it? Once you begin to personally have a real feel that what is happening to me is not a personal, is not an individual occurrence, that it is a large-scale molecular activity. And by large scale, anything other than you being involved is large scale. I'm not trying to hedge what I'm saying, but it does not mean that just because, surely none of you people are that dumb. If you are, get out. I mean, I only got so much time. I can't spend it. It does not mean that just because suddenly you feel in the middle of the night that you're afraid of death. That doesn't mean that everybody, if you live in, Jamaica, Long Island, it doesn't mean that suddenly everybody in Jamaica woke up in the middle of the night and went, God, I'm going to die. I'm afraid I'm going to die in a few years. But what happened to you was not an individual, personal experience. To believe it was, you've got to go back and ask and answer to me, what are you going to think next? What are you going to feel next? And from whence cometh that which made you suddenly be afraid of dying? Where did it come from? I mean, did you decide beforehand, hey, tonight I'm going to trick myself, I'm going to bed, and about 2 o'clock I'm going to wake up in a cold sweat and realize, hell, I'm nearly 50. Do you realize maybe 50 more years I'm going to be dead? I can't conceive. There will be no me. Did you plan to do that? No. So where did it come from? Well, you know, it came from somewhere, my childhood. In other words, it came from out there. And there is no out there. Whatever is happening to you is happening out there. Whatever is happening out there, in some way, is happening in you. To separate the two requires that you be conscious in the ordinary sense. It requires that you be conscious in the ordinary sense and no more. For those of you keeping up with science, I'd like to hear me drag it in periodically, which if I weren't dealing with who I was dealing with, we'd bring it in periodically, more periodically. Some of you may have heard such matters as this. It's not a lesson in physics, but I point out again, I could pick out maps anywhere, and physics right now, especially subatomic physics, offers a splendid parallel to what some of you should be able to begin to see. It's as good a map as I can find going, rather than ones that I just absolutely make up. In the world of subatomic mescopography, them coming up with so-called electronic and then enhanced, well, at least electronic, quote, photographs of subatomic particles. There's a phenomenon, I'm just going to repeat the way they describe it, and we'll leave it at that. That these kinds of photographs that they can get out of these gigantic, super-duper up-to-date electron microscopes, at the subatomic level, when they do put them in a printed fashion, they have to be put out of focus to be seen. That's the way they describe it. That if they were left in focus of what the electron microscope saw at that level, the particles would be invisible to the human eye. They have to shift them out of focus, and then it gives the appearance that you are looking at something. Does anyone, those of you who have been around long enough, what I've tried to describe to you in various ways of neuralizing something, of being able to remember something without thinking about it, to be able to see something without looking at it. If you're going to stare, which is what ordinarily studying, if someone says, here is a brand new, the most up-to-date, the best photographic evidence of subatomic reality that we have, staring at it, that is, being ordinarily conscious of it, of here, let me see that, I submit to you, would be akin to what the physicists are describing as saying what the microscope saw and what we attempted to print would be invisible if it were in focus. That's what you have when you stare, is everything's invisible. You've seen it all before. You never see it anymore. You don't see the people you're living with. You don't see what you do every day. You don't even see what you look like in the mirror. You do not see your surroundings. You can't see anything. It's all invisible. You could just as well be blind and you can get by in life. You do anyway. You're supposed to. How about the various ways I've tried to describe this certain kind of yellow circuit, apparently mental process of neuralizing? If you stare, which includes the whole gamut of what ordinary people would call ponder, think about, study, it's staring. It is the neural processes in you, electrically, biochemically, running their same routes, the same neural peptides connecting the same junctures, And this is almost known, life is almost let ordinary people know this. I've used this example before. It's the same kind of thing that not only world-famous scientists, but almost everyone's had some experience with, that you're back maybe in college, working late at night on the weekend before your final exam in college-level algebra, trying to make some sense out of quadratic equations. You do them by rote in the classroom, but you think, I don't understand it. If they ask me a question, if they pose it in any form that's not an exact replica of what we've been doing, I'll be lost because I've got no idea what they mean by it. I could plug it in if they give me the same kind of presentation of the problem that we've been doing all quarter. And you drink coffee, and you pace, and you smoke cigarettes, and you pull in your hair, and you rub your eyes, and you take a shower. And suddenly, you go, ah! The more famous variations of the many scientists that say they were working on a problem, mathematicians, and other hard scientists. And they say some have been plaguing them day and night, and they just come to a dead end. And one night they went in the backyard and looked over and decided, I should move the rose bushes over here. And they started working at midnight, moving the rose bushes over here, and suddenly go, ah. That is a variation of what I'm talking about. It just happens in life, but they quit staring, and what apparently was the problem on their mind got out of focus. But as long as you're staring, in the same way that they are now saying about these electron photographs of subatomic reality, is invisible unless you put it out of focus purposefully. That is in the same section of town as I've been trying to tell you about neuralizing. You almost have to take that what you're wanting to see and put it out of focus. That is, you have to take the two eyes that ordinarily look at it, not just out there, but internally. This all compared on the basis of a binary situation. And apparently, if you're really trying to study it and to ponder it, it seems to go back and forth like a ping pong ball. And now I've got it, now I don't. It couldn't be that way. It could be this. No, it couldn't be that way. It's as though you took it and you pushed the whole thing out of focus into an unknown third area, wherein you are not, in the ordinary sense, any longer thinking about it. Thinking about it runs its course very shortly. You just didn't notice it ran its course in you by about the age of 6.5 or 7. Since then, you've been running on ordinary energy, on celery soup. You don't need an electron microscope to do this. It's the reality, a piece of what I've been trying to tell you about neuralizing. It's not a matter of looking at some so-called problem, some situation in your life or within you, and I will figure it out. It's invisible. You not only do not find a solution, you never see what the problem is. Assuming, I'm just using your damn words about it being a problem. You don't see the basis of it. If you can get it out of focus, if you can get away from the two binary eyes, which parenthetically, for all of you erstwhile mystical lovers, how about all these ideas from the East about the great third eye, that Buddhas and people who can do yoga for 24 hours a day and not only live on celery soup but love it, they develop a third eye. A lot of people, through what life needs, a lot of people have talked about a lot of things that were a reflection of something greater, and they had no idea what they were talking about. But third eyes, you might say, in a serendipitous manner, almost coincides with the kinds of things I'm talking about. But staring in every ordinary sense of everything that you think, the whole routine that you have been through up here all of your life, staring renders the photographs invisible. You can only see when you get it out of focus. You can only see when you stop this stereoscopic vision of two eyes and add a third eye. You'll be surprised what you can see. Of the old Viewmaster of holding it up, and apparently they have taken the stereoscopic vision that happens in 3D world, and you look at it and it's no longer a flat picture. You look at that little viewer and it's like it all got depth and you saw things you didn't. That's child's play. To be able to produce triscopic vision, just all around you are things that you never see because you stare at them and they're invisible. Several weeks ago, I threw out a little phrase about if it moves, poke it. And I seem to add on every few weeks another 2 or 3 minutes. So I'll add a little more meat to it. Part of what I inferred from that, with that statement was the necessity to scan, to investigate, and in truth to neuralize far and wide that there is no sacred ground, there are no holy exceptions of what to poke. And part of what I meant by if it moves, poke it, that is, if your consciousness says it moves, that is, says that it is alive, you are wired up so that molecularly you react to something you hear about, read about, or it comes back into your own neural activity in here, it seems, and it moves. To you it's alive. It'll be the notion of religion, social injustice, anything. The heartlessness of women. I love it. Have any of you ever found, completely off the subject, so you say, curious throughout history, since men have primarily been in charge of writing all the plays and literature and etc., operas of men continuing to sing out, to write out about, boy, how you can't trust women, how they'll misuse you, they just treat you, they just play with you as long as you entertain them for a few seconds, a few hours. They just walk off and they're just unbelievably unbelievable. Has anybody ever found that curious? Women's never done that about men, up until recently. And that's still not the same way as men's done it. Back to the real subject. Anything that moves has got to be a subject for you to attempt to see. Not just coming and listening to me or anybody, not just reading a book from me or from someone else. If to you, just at your ordinary level of consciousness, if it moves, you got to poke at it. But notice how much of life seems to be non-moving. Because to you it's invisible. You don't even notice it anymore. But if you stop and look around at the places, the neighborhoods in which you drive to work every day, the physical milieu of your office, the people there, the way the place is set up, where the machines are, where the filing systems are, where they have a secretary's desk and the boss's desk, why one desk is bigger than another. It's now just backdrops. It's just flats painted behind where the fat people sing and the band plays. And it's not. If you look around at it, it will move. And if it moves, it deserves to be poked. It's everywhere. As long as you're living at line level consciousness, though, I repeat to you, just notice it. Life is almost invisible. Why do people seek entertainment? Why do people go on vacations, apparently? What seems to be the motivation? It's to make something visible again. It's to make something move. But then notice how little you can stand of it. I'll do something exciting. I'll go to Tasmania and I'll live in a Tasmanian house with a Tasmanian family, and I'll eat how little you can stand of it. I'll do something exciting. I'll go to Tasmania and I'll live in a Tasmanian house with a Tasmanian family, and I'll eat Tasmanian food, and it'll be a whole new experience. It will. I guess the average person, they might last in that environment, who knows what. Part of the first day. And then they find someone to translate a Tasmanian phone book and to say, look up under Sheraton. If no Sheraton, look under Hilton. If you notice in a certain way, literally, life is almost invisible. That living your ordinary life, you have to give it no particular notice. Now, this is not an attack on ordinary humanity. And I'm aware that throughout history, many would-be mystical systems have said, hey, humanity is walking around in a dream, they're walking around in a fog, and everybody should listen to me and I'll shake you out of it. Don't worry about that. Humanity is doing just what it should. But what you don't notice individually is that almost everything is invisible. You're just accustomed to it as you're supposed to be. It is quite and most efficient. But it renders almost everything motionless. People, large movements that are going on that you don't see, you take it as being a personal phenomenon flaring up in you. You don't see that things are moving, because if they are invisible, they don't move. If you're staring at them, they don't move. Because if you're staring at them through ordinary stereoscopic vision, stereoscopic, i.e. binary thought, it becomes invisible. It's just there. Somebody has to, or something has to make you go, oh, yeah, that. Is that the one that's been here every week? That chair. Is that it? The one that's here? People, your sexual partners, your family, people you work with, people that you meet in passing at stores, on street corners, at bus stops. You say hello, you pass the time of day, a few sentences, and you don't really see them. There's no consequence, especially I know, to people on great mystical quests. I was pondering another imponderable, and I don't have time to chit, much less to chat, with some ne'er-do-well working in a 7-Eleven store. It's just, here's my coffee, and give me a paper, and you hand the money, and then you have to look and make sure, how much did I give them? It just all takes place. Nothing's wrong. That's the way things operate. Looked at from one viewpoint, it's a miracle. It's a great, beautiful miracle that all this takes place, and it's all happening almost invisibly. That it takes a shock for somebody to go, wait, didn't I give you a 20? Or to taste their coffee and go, ew! When was this made? The last Guy Fawkes Day? As long as it is more or less in focus, it's invisible. You get your money, you drink your coffee, you walk out to the car, you read the paper, and unless something is really moving in that paper, you can stand there and walk to your car and sip your coffee and read, scan through. Not really scan, not in the sense I use it, but read through 2 or 3 of the first columns of the newspaper, and if somebody came up and said, "What did you just read?" You don't know. It was something about the Libyan affair. Your eyes scanned through that. The light waves picked up words. Apparently information came in, but it was invisible. 5 seconds later, you don't know what you read. All you can say was, it was something about Libya, or it was something about the new, those new figures that they put in Washington about the, you know, the gross national grossness, or whatever it is. And that's it. And yet, if nobody points it out, or you have occasion to notice it, you apparently are doing something. You're sipping your coffee, and you walk to your car, and you read and read and read, and you open the door of the car, and you sit down, and you crank it, and you turn the paper over, apparently something interesting, and you read some more. Like a little vacation, a little food. Yet it's not digested, it's not chewed, it does not nourish. And I don't mean that information in the paper has any intrinsic nourishment. That's not the point. But it's not possible to be nourished from any kind of new information unless it is willfully, carefully chewed, and it can't be chewed with 2 sets of teeth. It cannot be seen with only 2 eyes. All right, I'm going to give out something tonight. I have hinted around for some number of years with the people who has been around this about giving out something specific. For you newer people, I'm not going to give you much of a prologue to this. Some of you newer people, or people just seeing this all for the first time, this is going to be almost meaningless. If you think it is not almost meaningless and you attempt to do it, don't expect anything miraculous to happen if you're just seeing these videos tonight for the first time or the first 20th or 30th time. But I'm not going to tell the people in other cities to cut off the tape. You can go ahead and see it. But I have spent some number of years with some number of people before even deciding to give out anything this apparently physical and specific. So if it does not strike you in any particular way, don't worry about it. If it does strike you in some particular way, do worry about it. That is, you can go ahead and try it, but I want you to understand in a way that's not real mystical, the people this was intended for has had long exposure to this for me to even consider putting out this kind of information. That may or may not help clarify the matter, but what else is new? Throughout the little prologue to the rest of you, throughout the great history of this kind of activity in humanity, whether you could correctly identify it or not, every system that moved enough, that is, when somebody showed up enough that they had an effect over an area that extended beyond the outskirts of their town, not only in space but in time, there was always a kind of method or so in the center of it. Sometimes it was as simplistic as it might appear to some of you now as prayer. Other times it was such notions, teachings as attempt to remember the name of the gods with each and every breath, or a variation of that was become conscious of each and every breath you take, it will have a great impact on you. To go about your business, but strive faithfully to become aware of each and every breath. Now, after the person who presented the various and sundry methods that have been used, after that person was gone, it falls into the binary world, as I've pointed out to you, that there is no longer an intrinsic value in that method, any more than there is an intrinsic value in any religion, in astrology, in the tarot cards. It is not any intrinsic value, any secret knowledge in that. The value at one time was in the understanding of the person who invented it, who presented it. I'm really lying when I say things about invented it or concocted it, but they presented the form of it. The energy is always from the same source, whether it be a method of prayer or meditation presented to a group in another time zone 4,000 years ago, whether it was the form that came from energy, but the form presented to some group in another time zone 100 years ago. It was called Remember Your Breath. As many of you are aware, I have never given out anything specifically, such as that, but I have decided that the time not only could be appropriate, but that many of you could use it. But once I give this out, whether you agree with what I'm about to say or not, is tough tomatoes. Because once I give this out and describe it, those of you who have been around a while, you'll at least immediately see what I'm describing. That after that, it is going to change the pitch, the tone. We're going to modulate the key in which you are presently bumbling and suffering. And you cannot do it any longer. Because if you say you are suffering, if you say you are perplexed, if you say that you have stubbed your toe yet again in the dark, it means one thing. First off, inescapable. Is that what I'm going to describe you are not doing. That's that. And if you want to pursue your inquiries and your crying beyond that, you're putting yourself back in the kindergarten of suffering and stumbling. What I'm about to give and describe to you is a physical reality based upon the kind of efforts that you have made, those of you that's been exposed even long enough. I am not in any way going to attempt to prove it to you medically, biologically, but those of you, many of you by now, you will feel exactly what I'm talking about. I do not want it discussed in any manner ever. I don't want to hear you ever try to describe it. If it ever gets talked about, personally, it will be between you and I will bring up the subject. I don't ever you attempt to write about it, to tell anybody about it. I'm going to give you a small verbal description, and there is a name for this, which I'm not going to give you. Just a name for this. There is a name for the energy that's been behind these kinds of methods. I'm going to draw, do you get good shots of this, big enough? A figure. line level consciousness. Out of all my past drawings for you, I want to tell you now, it is a physical reality. And it exists right there. It exists, of course, in a three-dimension plane. But the drawings and descriptions I've given you before of that level moving throughout generations, it has moved, but in every generation, it is right there. The movement over the last thousands of years that man has had yellow circuit activity enough to be conscious, it falls within that line. Now what this amounts to is a two-step method, is you have got to hold the line. And that means two things. You've got to remember it's there, and you have got to hold the awareness of this plane, and it hits you right there, right at between the center, and you can feel it change a little bit, don't worry. It's of no importance. Between the center of the eyeballs and what seems to be the top of the eyeball, but it cuts right through the upper part of the eyes. Now I want you to consider, without me being anatomically correct, the pelvis. The second stage of this, there is a physical reality to this that I'm going to describe at all. You can feel it, but it physically exists. And it is this. The way in which I drew it, the triangle is not going to, is a triangle going from that line to the center of the pelvis, is to just literally feel your own pelvic bone going through here, and that this triangle, the tip of it, is in the center of your pelvis, right down here in the middle of your gut, but are resting on the pelvic bone. And it goes up, and the triangle is configured so that the small part is what the line of consciousness is. There are two parts to this. I don't want to really give too much information for people to begin to let their own partnership voice imagine that you're having a particular problem. But it will seem at times to shift that you can do one and not the other, and that's not true. But there is that sensation, is why I start out saying that it is two areas to this. But the sensation that you're working on too is an illusion. You've got to hold that line, and then you've got to keep it balanced to imagine and then feel it. But by imagine is what the instruction is. It's to feel that there is literally, physically, there's a triangle that goes up from the center of the pelvis down in the center of you. I say center from front to back, and then in the central portion of your own pelvic bone, and it goes right up, and the ends of it, where it forms the third part of the triangle, supports line level consciousness. It runs right there. The method that I am giving is that you have got to continually be aware of this, and you can feel it. It physically exists, except it is not plotted in any book on physiology. The reality of it you can feel. To be conscious in the way that you are now, to do what you do now, to live in every manner that you live, through feeling, through thought, through suffering, is not possible if you keep this triangle balanced in all ways. If you keep it balanced and you hold that line level consciousness in balance from this triangle with its base in the center of your pelvis, you cannot do what you do now. You cannot think as you think now, and you cannot feel as you feel now. Withal, when you're back to being you, when you're suffering, be immediately aware as soon as you can, because I'm telling you now there are no exceptions. You are not holding the line, and you are not in balance as I have described it. There is wired into humanity that configuration. It's just as real for the few people who can feel it, and those who can't, forget it. I'm talking to you newer people. You cannot find it in a book, no medical tome, no occult book. Pieces of this have been used, but never mind all that. There is a physical reality and sensation, whether you're walking, standing, running. It is physical. It's not limited to that, but it is physically quite real that you can feel that triangle from the center of your pelvic bone, and it comes to right here, and there is where you're conscious. If you hold this line and you keep it balanced, like imagining, even though I didn't draw it perfectly, that was a perfectly balanced triangle that was symmetrical, which I didn't bother to pre-draw it, but this would be a symmetrical triangle, and you can hold that, which will not interfere with anything that you ordinarily think you should be doing. But if you hold that, you cannot stare. And what it will make possible is from the center as you balance and hold that line, and you can then do what I've been trying to describe to you in ways, words like neuralize, omnidirectional consciousness. You can then scan. You can then cease to stare. But you can only do it when that configuration is balanced and you've got line level consciousness, your ordinary consciousness. You've got it perfectly balanced in the center of your pelvic region, right there in the center, right back here where all these people used to imagine and draw pictures of great Buddhas and Indian people and Afghanistan people with 3 eyes. Life was mumbling, but that is where you can scan. It is right in the center of line level consciousness physically, where it is in you now. You can then cease to stare. Not just out there, which is not much of a trick. If you still think it is, tut-tut. It's not just out there, it's internally. It's what seems to be consciousness to you now. You can look at it as 2 ways, if you could see it correctly, that it's nowhere. It is like the knot in the rope. You try to find it and it's not there. You try to look at it and suddenly all you're left with apparently is the thing trying to look at it. And where'd it go? It's either that or after the fact to realize I was staring. I was almost localized in consciousness. That is, I was so mad and thinking about what so-and-so did to me that in a sense my consciousness was focused, where I did wake up realizing in less than 15 years I'll be dead. They're both the same. They're both automatic neural activities that have nothing to do with you individually. this does. Some of you, it's going to be the first time that you had a distinct sensation of being individual. But you've got to do both. You've got to balance the triangle, the whole line level consciousness right there. You've got to keep it balanced. Don't look for anything more mystical. You won't have to worry about that. I'm telling you physically is to be aware that of this triangle, and you can feel it, and to keep this level. Just imagine there is a plumb bob in there, and you've got to keep it level. And then right there in the center of it, in the center of this plane that is line level consciousness, right through here, in the center you'll find is the place that you can literally be non-directional. It is a place where you can think without thinking about. It's a place that you can see without looking. That you can take everything out of focus and you can see it in a way that it amounts to what I used to refer to as truly being able to scan. But it can only happen when that's in balance. Some of you are going to find, I suggest to you, your first real sensation of what neuralizing is. And it won't have to come about from reading some mystical book or from me conjuring up some strange map. You may walk out of here tonight or in the morning to walk in the 7-Eleven store and start to reach for coffee. $7.15 in a 7-Eleven store, reaching for red-ass coffee. Moments before, rubbing my eyes, the whole place invisible. And you hold this balance to where you can scan where consciousness is neurally, molecularly, in a position that's never used. And I'm not talking about, for many of you, some kind of long-range activity. I'm talking about literally, perhaps before the sun goes down tomorrow. If you take that and you all day, as you balance that triangle that supports consciousness, you can do it. There's no great trick. Anybody that says they can't, you're wrong. If you say you can't, that means you won't. That means you probably do not belong in this. But when you get up, when you sit down, when you get out of the car, when you walk in the place, and you balance that three-dimensionally, and you balance that plane of consciousness right through here, just that's the feeling of here I am, this is me, and it's from the center of it, the literal center, it's right above where that triangle is based on the pelvic bone. Is right there, you can, while everything almost invisible, and you reach for the cup. You cannot be you and do that. Conversely, whenever you're back in the hands, apparently, of you individually, you and all of your forefathers, you and all the sins of your fathers, you and all the sins and insanity of your culture, the history of humanity. If you're back in that, if those voices, those tiger noises, are at that time a part of your consciousness, without any exception, you can't have it any other way, you have not kept line level consciousness balanced, and thus you cannot scan, you cannot be in a state of non-staring, you cannot discover what neuralizing is, which all of it's just words. I'm giving you a physical, a neural reality of it is right in there, but you've got to balance that triangle. and keep line level consciousness balanced in relationship to your own hips. And you do that, and internally, you can see that. You can understand that you would not believe. But at least for the time being, you cannot live as you live. You cannot think the same thing over and over. It is physically, it is neurologically, it is biochemically, it is electrically impossible. You cannot do that. You cannot balance that triangle and whole line level in plumb, which that must be done for you to be able to be conscious without being conscious of this or that. As you can truly scan and not stare at anything, when you're doing that, you cannot think the same thing twice. You cannot feel the same thing twice. Every way that you've ever suffered, every fear that you ever had, would find this situation to be its literal nemesis. They cannot coexist. You cannot be you and balance line level consciousness and be able to scan. You cannot do both. It is a fact that anybody can do. From now on, any time that you are suffering, any time that you are perplexed, bewildered, set upon, discouraged, almost caught again by your own personal demons, don't tell me unless you're prepared for me to ask. Because you cannot do both. I tell you one more time tonight, it is a physical reality. That wiring structure exists in humanity. It's always existed. It has never been described in this manner. It's never been described because the time was not right. Nobody knew it. I didn't know it. Nobody knew it. To be activated this far, is you can feel the neural pathways that create what amounts to literally a triangle from the center of your hips that balances up to right there is where you exist. It's not a matter of faith. It's not a matter of a mystical theory I've concocted. You either feel it or you don't. But most of those that I'm addressing at this night and that will hear this immediately that's been around this, you'll be able to feel it. It's not a theory. You can feel this red triangle I have drawn. Just to assure you, can just stand right up and there it is. And you can feel line level consciousness. And it's not just a tipping of the head. It is not just physical activity. It is connected to it. But you can feel, without any doubt, my ordinary, everyday, continuing sensation of me is right there. The feelings that apparently affect the respiratory system fall within a certain area of the triangle, and yet everything comes out right here. And I either cannot find where consciousness is, or else it is located in a place that is immovable at that moment. This is the shattering of being tied to that. As you can feel the literal neural activity that is based on this being supported by a triangle in the center of your pelvis. And it is a distinct sensation. You can't get just hung up on that, of just being able to do that part, just to stand up and move around after this is over and to feel that. Might give some of you a renewing of your interest in several papers I wrote many years ago about internal posture. But once you can hold that balance, you can internally, neurally, not a mystical trick. When that balance is held, you can break right at line level, consciousness free from staring. You can be actively close to the reality of what I've been calling neuralizing. It's not just a trick to use now and then. In a sense, compared to everybody else, compared to your ordinary state, you can suddenly put everything slightly out of focus. And when you do that, you can see that which is normally invisible. But you cannot see it where you're out of balance, when that is out of balance. You cannot see it when this, the whole line level, is staring. The whole world becomes invisible. It's just there. It's a matter of being able to hold and balance the line and then scan. And they are tied together. It's the same thing. But you cannot be you, no matter who you are. You cannot be you and keep that balanced and find out that right in here is the place. No mystical descriptions, no further would-be occult flim-flam. It's right in here. Once that is balanced, once that triangle, you're aware of it and you can balance it. It's right in the center back there is a place that you can be conscious just in an ordinary sense. Forget mystical dreams or visions, that you can be conscious right now, do quite well, walk down the street, drive a car, punch a computer, and this thing can be conscious in a way that you were never aware of. And it will change to a noticeable, a discernible degree, everything about you. Because you cannot be you. You cannot think and feel and do what you've been doing while balancing, while holding the line and balancing it and scanning. You cannot do it. If you do, it will just, you'll just fuck up everything. Mr. Rowland? This is an epilogue on the tape, and it's not for the new people just walking in off the street, but you people in the other cities that qualify under my last directive, whether you've been there for at least 3 months. I've got another task that I want you to do for the following week after you hear this tape. I want you to pick out someone that apparently is an almost diametrically opposed type to what you think you are. Someone whose anger overwhelms you, somebody whose mechanical cheerfulness almost makes you OD on sugar and gag, somebody that apparently you and this person dance and they always lead. All you've got to do is show a little hostility toward you. It could be the person that you buy a newspaper from every morning. That for years you've tried to say hello or something and you found out that to you and other people he is so gruff that to you, you even have dreams, I'm going to quit going there. I'll walk 2 blocks on my way to get a paper. I can't, somebody like that, I just don't know what to do with them. You better not be dumb enough to try and use this with somebody in the ordinary world that could prove to be harmful to you. That is, do not necessarily do this to your employer. Those of you that understand a little bit more, I'll tell you that you could quite well do it to your employer, but I want you, if you have any doubt, to be careful who you do this with. But all of you know somebody that has some general scheme of their behavior that you can't deal with. Hostility is one of the best ones to describe. Somebody that you work with in your office, somebody that you know that all they got to do is be a little hostile. They can raise their voice, they can look at you accusingly and say, you know, did you fuck that up again? And you just turn into jelly. You just say, well, I don't know how to deal with that. It is a transfer of energy as everything else. And what I want you to do is to reverse the flow of the energy. And here is how you go about it. You have to do an absolute imitation of them. And then I want you to see what happens. Now, no one is going to hurt you physically. Those of you who believe that, those of you who believe that you are of a nerdish, innate nature, that you're fearful, and that you know someone that at the least provocation gets loud and boisterous and even threatening in their manner or demeanor. And if you tried that with them, they would surely whip your young ass. And that's not true. As I said, if you knew how to... Don't do it if you have any doubt, though. But nobody is going to hurt you physically. You have my money-back guarantee. But take a person that has a general behavior that you find to be inaccessible, you can't understand it, you can't deal with it, and I want you, at least one person in the next week, and all of you should be able to think of somebody as I'm saying this. I want you to do it to them. Enough of you are there now that there are probably some of you that know someone that is always cheerful, even on April the 15th. Somebody that every morning when you see them, they go, hey, how are you? And your feeling is, how am I? This damn job, and I just got up, and the same old crap, and the subway system, the freeway's backed up, and anyway, all you can do is mumble, and you just wish they wouldn't do it. It's tomorrow morning. As soon as you can, you walk in, and you've got to beat them to the punch. You're going to reverse this ordinarily established flow of energy, this exchange between you and them and other people. Is before they can say a word, is you go, hey, what's happening? What a day, huh? What a day, what a day. All you got to do is imitate them, and don't entertain any of your own voices that say, hey, they'll realize that I'm doing something funny. Or if I actually imitate them, which I'm saying do, use their words, use their gestures. If they go, hey, every morning, go, what a day, what a day, what a day. Do that. But do not entertain any notion that, wait a minute, if I do that, they're going to say, hey, you're imitating me. Their voice is going to tell you that, but that's something else to observe. Because the voices are going to tell you that are going to say, they cannot help but notice I'm imitating them. And I say, they won't. And then I say, isn't that funny? Isn't that curious? I'm not going to tell you much more. I just want you to keep your eyes open because it is going to have a distinct physical effect on the other person. If you return a kind of hostility towards somebody that's always hostile toward you, they're not going to get more hostile. They're not going to hurt you. Notice what happens. It's going to stop. It's going to put a shock into the byplay. Simply do an imitation. Give somebody the kind of behavior, verbally, gestures. Give them what they've been giving you. Do it and keep your eyes open. Remember what I described tonight when I say keep your eyes open is don't stare at what happens. And I assure you that nothing harmful is going to happen to you, even those of you that consider yourself fearful, that you believe, well, hey, if I turn on George and the kind of stuff he does to me, if tomorrow the first time he looks at me funny, if I say, hey, get off my case and don't give me that crap, you're always fucking up things. Hey, it ain't my fault. And that's the kind of stuff he does to me, and I go, yeah, and I walk off. If I do that to him, that man will take a damn trash can to my head. He'll go into a rage. He'll become uncontrollable. No. Keep your eyes open. He will not become uncontrollable. Contraire to say the least. Keep your eyes open. But take a full little scheme, a little scenario, an imitation of their behavior and give it back to them. Try to beat them to the punch. Pick out a day and decide, Monday I will do it. As soon as I see the person, as soon as we have any kind of byplay between us, wherein this other person would start manifesting the kind of behavior that seems to put me at a loss, before they can start, I'm going to do it to them. Just do an imitation of them. Just very quickly. Don't drag it out any more than they would. Just do it and watch.